Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon and watched the stars through the main screen. The year 2387 had brought many changes to humanity, but space still felt endless and full of secrets. His crew worked quietly around him as they moved through the asteroid field near the edge of human space. This was routine work, but Jake never got tired of seeing new places among the stars. Chief Engineer Lisa Rodriguez called out from her station that all systems were running well. She had been with Jake for 3 years and knew the ship better than anyone. Navigation Officer Ben Carter was plotting their course through the floating rocks, while Communications Specialist Amy Walsh monitored all the channels for any signals. They were a good team, and Jake trusted them with his life. The mission was simple enough. Earth wanted them to map this region and look for anything useful. Mining companies were always hungry for new asteroid fields, and the military wanted to know what was out here. Jake had done dozens of these trips, and they usually found nothing but empty space and worthless rocks. Today felt different, though he could not say why. Amy suddenly looked up from her console with a confused expression. She said she was picking up something strange on the long-range sensors. The signal was not like anything in their databases, and it was definitely artificial. Jake ordered her to put it on the main screen, and they all watched as a new contact appeared on their displays. The object was huge and moving with purpose through the asteroids. Its design was nothing like human ships with strange curves and metal that seemed to shift color in the starlight. Jake had seen pictures of the few alien artifacts that humans had found over the years, but this was something else entirely. This was a working alien ship, and it was heading right toward them. Ben Carter reported that the alien vessel was 3 times the size of the horizon and built with technology they could not identify. Lisa Rodriguez ran every scan she could think of, but the ship seemed to absorb or deflect most of their sensors. Amy Walsh tried to establish communication using every protocol in the book, but got no response. Jake made the decision to hold position and wait. First contact with an alien species was too important to mess up by running away. He ordered Amy to keep trying to talk to them while Ben prepared to move quickly if needed. Lisa made sure their defensive systems were ready, but Jake hoped they would not need them. The alien ship stopped just outside weapon range and began transmitting something back to them. Amy worked frantically to decode the signal and finally managed to put together a basic translation program. The message was short and cold. The aliens identified themselves as the Zephyrian Collective and demanded that the humans surrender their ship immediately. Jake felt his blood turn cold as Amy translated more of the transmission. The aliens spoke about humans like they were animals to be captured and processed. They mentioned something called the Dominion Chain and how humanity would fit into it at the bottom. The tone of the message made it clear that the Zephyrians saw no possibility of humans refusing their demands. Jake ordered Amy to respond that they came in peace and wanted to establish friendly relations. The response from the Zephyrian ship came back quickly and left no room for misunderstanding. Commander Vexitar informed them that resistance was pointless and that their species would be evaluated for usefulness to the collective. Any attempts to flee would be met with immediate destruction. The alien ship suddenly launched smaller vessels that moved faster than anything Jake had ever seen. Ben Carter shouted that they were being surrounded, while Lisa Rodriguez reported that the aliens were preparing to board them. Jake realized that talking was over and ordered Ben to get them out of there immediately. The horizon turned and accelerated, as fast as it could, but the alien ships were faster. Energy beams lanced out and struck their shields, while boarding pods closed in on their hull. Jake knew they could not outrun their pursuers, so he ordered Lisa to prepare for emergency jump to hyperspace. The risk was huge, since they had not finished calculating a safe course, but staying meant capture or death. The first boarding pod attached to their hull with a loud clang that echoed through the ship. Amy Walsh reported that the aliens were cutting through their armor and would be inside within minutes. Jake made the hardest decision of his career and ordered Ben to abandon his position and help fight off the boarders. Someone had to stay at navigation to make the jump, but Jake could handle that himself. The aliens broke through just as Jake initiated the hyperspace sequence. He heard weapons fire and shouting from the corridor, but kept his focus on the controls. The ship shuddered and began to tear itself away from normal space, but something went wrong. Ben Carter appeared on the bridge with blood on his uniform and reported that the aliens had taken Amy Walsh. She had been in the corridor when they broke through, and there was no time to save her. Jake felt the hyperspace field stabilize around them and knew they were safe for now. But Amy was gone, and the aliens knew about humanity. He looked at his remaining crew and saw the same fear in their eyes that he felt in his heart. Everything had changed in just a few minutes, and Jake knew that humanity was now at war whether they wanted it or not. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood before the Global Defense Council in the underground complex beneath Geneva and delivered the news that would change everything. The report from Captain Morrison and his crew had taken 3 days to reach Earth, and every hour of delay made the situation worse. The council members sat in stunned silence as she explained what humanity now faced. The alien species called themselves the Zephyrian Collective, and they were not explorers or traders looking for peaceful contact. They were conquerors who had already claimed dozens of worlds across their section of the galaxy. Kate explained that according to the limited data they had gathered, the Zephyrians operated under a system that viewed other species as resources, to be harvested or slaves to be controlled. Dr. Alex Morgan had spent those 3 days analyzing every piece of information they could extract from the encounter. His xenobiology team had worked around the clock to understand what little they knew about Zephyrian society and technology. The picture that emerged was terrifying in its scope and implications for humanity. Alex stood up to address the council, and his hands shook slightly as he activated the holographic display. The image showed a map of the local galactic region with hundreds of star systems marked in different colors. He explained that red systems were controlled by the Zephyrians, while yellow ones belonged to their allies and vassals. Green systems were marked as conquered territories that provided resources and slave labor. The worst part came when Alex showed them what he called the Dominion Chain. This was a rigid hierarchy that controlled how species interacted across vast sections of the galaxy. At the top were ancient beings known as hegemony lords who ruled entire sectors with absolute power. Below them were species like the Zephyrians, who served as enforcers and administrators. At the bottom were hundreds of conquered races who existed only to serve their masters. General Marcus Blake asked the question that everyone was thinking. Where did humanity fit into this system, and what did the aliens want from them? Alex pulled up another display that showed the standard processing protocols used by the Zephyrians when they encountered new species. The answer was simple and brutal. Humans would be evaluated for their usefulness and then assigned roles within the hierarchy. The evaluation process involved testing human physical capabilities, mental abilities, and technological development. Those who scored highest would become soldiers or technicians in the Zephyrian military. Average performers would be assigned to mining colonies or manufacturing centers. The lowest scores would be used for manual labor or biological experiments. Kate Sullivan interrupted to share the one piece of good news they had. Amy Walsh had managed to escape from the Zephyrian ship during the confusion of the boarding action. She was found 3 days later by a search and rescue team floating in an escape pod near the encounter site. Amy was badly injured but alive, and she had brought back critical intelligence about alien technology and military capabilities. Amy had spent 18 hours aboard the alien vessel before making her escape. During that time, she had observed their command structure and learned about their weapons and defenses. She reported that the Zephyrians were extremely confident in their superiority and seemed genuinely puzzled by human resistance to their demands. They had never encountered a species that refused to acknowledge the Dominion Chain. Dr. Morgan explained that this presented both an opportunity and a massive problem for humanity. The good news was that the aliens clearly did not understand. Human psychology or motivation? They expected quick surrender followed by integration into their hierarchy. The bad news was that every other species in the galaxy had eventually submitted to this system after their initial defeat. According to the intelligence that Amy had gathered, no species had ever successfully resisted incorporation into the chain for more than a few years. The Zephyrians and their superiors had thousands of years of experience in breaking the will of conquered peoples. They knew exactly how to destroy resistance movements and crush any hope of independence. General Blake began outlining the military preparations that Earth would need to make. The orbital defense platforms would need upgrades, and every colony in human space required immediate reinforcement. Mining operations would be converted to military production, and the civilian fleet would be pressed into service as troop transports and supply ships. The numbers were not encouraging, and everyone in the room knew it. Humanity had fewer than 50 major warships, and most of those were designed for exploration rather than combat. The Zephyrian scout force alone had been larger than the entire human navy. A full invasion fleet would overwhelm their defenses within days. Kate Sullivan stood up again and looked around the room at the faces of the most powerful people on Earth. She could see fear in their eyes, but also something else that gave her hope. There was anger there, too, and a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. She had seen that same expression on the faces of human soldiers throughout history when they faced impossible odds. She reminded the Council that humanity had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that should have destroyed them completely. They had climbed out of caves and built cities and reached for the stars despite every obstacle the universe could throw at them. The aliens might have superior technology and vast armies, but they did not understand what they were really facing. The Zephyrians expected humanity to behave like every other species they had conquered. They expected fear and submission and eventual acceptance of their place in the hierarchy. What they would get instead was something that had never appeared in their databases or strategic planning. They would face a species that simply refused to give up no matter how hopeless the situation became. Dr. Morgan closed the briefing with a final piece of intelligence from Amy Walsh. She had overheard Zephyrian officers discussing their timeline for the human conquest. They expected to complete the initial subjugation within 6 months and have the entire species properly integrated into the chain within 2 years. The invasion fleet was already being assembled and would arrive at Earth within 8 weeks. The council members filed out of the room to begin the desperate preparations for humanity's first galactic war. Kate Sullivan remained behind and stared at the star map still glowing in the center of the room. Somewhere out there, an alien armada was preparing to destroy everything she loved, but they had made one critical mistake in their calculations. They thought they were facing just another primitive species ready for conquest. Instead, they were about to learn what happened when you threatened the home of the most stubborn species in the galaxy. The Zephyrian invasion fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system exactly 8 weeks after the first encounter. Commander Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the primitive star system spread before him. 300 warships followed his command, and he expected this to be the easiest conquest of his career. Colony Administrator Sam Harper watched the alien ships appear on his screens from his position on Mars. The Red Planet had become humanity's first line of defense, with massive orbital platforms and underground bunkers that could house millions of civilians. Sam had spent 2 months preparing for this moment, but seeing the enemy fleet still made his stomach turn cold. The aliens began their attack exactly as human strategists had predicted. Energy beams lanced out toward the outer colonies while landing. Craft moved toward populated areas. Director Nancy Foster on Europa coordinated the evacuation of research facilities while emergency broadcasts went out across all human settlements. The war that everyone feared had finally begun. What happened next surprised the Zephyrian commanders more than anything they had experienced in centuries of conquest. Instead of the expected panic and surrender attempts, the humans responded with immediate and coordinated resistance. Every settlement became a fortress, and every civilian became a soldier ready to fight to the death. Sam Harper refused the alien demands for surrender and instead activated defense protocols that turned Mars into a nightmare for any invading force. Hidden weapon batteries emerged from the planet's surface, while orbital mines drifted toward the alien ships. Underground factories that had been producing mining equipment for months suddenly revealed their true purpose as military production centers. The Zephyrians had expected to face the usual pattern of primitive resistance, followed by quick collapse. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to have prepared for this war with impossible efficiency. Human defensive positions were built into the landscape itself and appeared to be designed by people who understood exactly how alien invasion tactics worked. Captain Morrison had been promoted to admiral and now commanded the human defense fleet from his new flagship. The UES Liberation was twice the size of his old ship and packed with weapons that human engineers had built using captured alien technology. He led his small fleet against impossible odds, but refused to retreat even when Zephyrian ships outnumbered his forces 10-1. The real shock came when the aliens tried to use their standard psychological warfare tactics. Broadcasts that had broken the will of dozens of species had no effect on humans at all. Threats that should have terrified primitive minds instead seemed to make human resistance even more fierce and determined. Engineer Lisa Rodriguez had spent the 8 weeks of preparation time developing new technologies that combined human creativity with alien science in ways that violated every known principle of galactic engineering. Her fusion drives produced more power than they should, according to Zephyrian physics. Her adaptive AI systems made decisions that confused alien tactical computers. The turning point of the initial invasion came when Amy Walsh transmitted a message across all Zephyrian communication channels. She had learned their language during her captivity and now used it to deliver a response that no alien commander had ever heard before. She told them that humanity rejected the Dominion chain completely and would never accept a place in their hierarchy. Dr. Alex Morgan had discovered something that explained why human resistance was so effective. The galactic hierarchy had made other species afraid to think creatively or challenge established methods. For thousands of years, innovation had been controlled by the upper levels of the chain. Species learned to follow orders and accept limitations rather than develop new solutions to old problems. Humans had never learned those limitations because they had never been part of the system. When faced with superior alien technology, they did not accept defeat. Instead, they found ways to turn that technology against its creators. Human engineers took Zephyrian weapons apart and built new versions that worked in completely unexpected ways. The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces was immediate and devastating. Their soldiers had been trained to fight enemies who followed predictable patterns of behavior. They had no idea how to handle humans who seemed to ignore every rule of warfare that the galaxy had followed for millennia. Colony Administrator Sam Harper led the defense of Mars with tactics that had never appeared in any Zephyrian military database. His forces used the planet's dust storms as cover, while hidden tunnels allowed rapid movement between defensive positions. When alien forces thought they had cornered human units, those units would disappear underground and emerge behind enemy lines. Director Nancy Foster turned Europa into a trap that cost the Zephyrians dozens of ships. The moon's ice surface concealed weapon systems that could track targets through hyperspace itself. When alien reinforcements arrived expecting to find a conquered research station, they instead flew into a killing field that had been carefully prepared over months of hard work. The most disturbing reports came from Zephyrian intelligence officers, who had monitored human communications during the fighting. Instead of the expected calls for surrender or negotiation, they found messages of encouragement and determination. Human civilians were volunteering to become soldiers, while their military forces planned even more aggressive counterattacks. Commander Vextar began to understand that this conquest was unlike anything in his experience. The humans were not fighting to delay inevitable defeat. They were fighting as if victory was possible, despite facing overwhelming odds. More importantly, they seemed to believe that death was preferable to submission, and this belief appeared to be shared by their entire species. The situation became even worse when word of human resistance began to spread through subspace communications to other parts of the galaxy. Conquered species that had accepted their place in the chain for generations suddenly began asking questions about whether resistance was truly impossible. The Zephyrian commanders realized they were facing more than a military problem. Admiral Morrison led a desperate attack against the main Zephyrian fleet that should have been suicide for his small force. Instead, his ships used new tactics that turned the aliens' numerical advantage against them. Human vessels appeared and disappeared like ghosts, while their weapons targeted Zephyrian ships in ways that bypassed every known defensive system. By the end of the first week of fighting, the Zephyrian invasion had stalled completely. They controlled no human settlements and had lost nearly 50 ships to an enemy that should have been crushed in the first day. Commander Vextar found himself in the unprecedented position of requesting reinforcements to complete what should have been a routine conquest. The request for help sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian command structure and beyond. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a primitive species had not only refused to surrender, but had actually fought the collective to a standstill. The implications of this development reached all the way to the hegemony lords themselves, and they were not pleased with what they heard. The war between humanity and the Zephyrian collective entered its second month, with no end in sight. What had started as a simple conquest operation had turned into something that defied every prediction in alien strategic databases. The humans continued to fight with a ferocity that shocked veteran Zephyrian commanders who had conquered dozens of worlds. Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Torres led guerrilla operations on worlds that the aliens thought they controlled. Her tactics involved using human psychology as a weapon in ways that Zephyrian military doctrine could not counter. She created scenarios where alien soldiers faced impossible moral choices that their rigid training had never prepared them to handle. On the mining world of Kepler Prime, Rachel's forces had turned every tunnel into a potential ambush point. But more than that, they had begun targeting the Zephyrian soldiers' sense of certainty about their mission. Human prisoners would ask their captors questions about the Dominion chain that planted seeds of doubt in alien minds. The questions were simple but devastating. Why did the hierarchy exist in the first place, and who had decided that some species deserved to rule while others served? Rachel had discovered that most Zephyrian soldiers had never questioned the system they fought to maintain. They accepted it as a natural law rather than something created by intelligent beings for their own benefit. Chief Scientist Paul Wright had established secret research facilities and asteroid bases that the aliens could not locate. His teams worked around the clock to develop new technologies by combining human creativity with captured alien science. The results violated basic principles of galactic engineering, but they worked in ways that confused and terrified Zephyrian technicians. Paul's greatest breakthrough came when he realized that alien technology was designed to follow predictable patterns. Galactic civilization had become standardized over thousands of years, with everyone using the same basic approaches to physics and engineering. Humans brought fresh perspectives that had never been considered by species trapped within the hierarchy. His fusion drives produced energy outputs that should have been impossible according to Zephyrian physics. His AI systems made decisions using logic patterns that alien computers could not predict or counter. Most importantly, his weapons could adapt their behavior during combat in ways that made Zephyrian defenses useless. Captain Amy Walsh commanded the stealth ship UES Defiance and carried out reconnaissance missions deep behind enemy lines. What she discovered changed everything about how humanity understood the galactic situation. The Zephyrian collective was just one part of a vast system of control that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. Amy's intelligence gathering revealed that the Dominion chain made other species afraid to think creatively or challenge established methods. Innovation was controlled by the upper levels of the hierarchy, and lower species were punished for developing new technologies or ideas. The system maintained itself by crushing any attempt at independent thought. The most shocking discovery came when Amy intercepted communications between Zephyrian commanders and their superiors. The aliens were genuinely confused by human behavior because no species in recorded galactic history had ever refused to accept their place in the hierarchy. The very concept of permanent resistance was outside their understanding. Admiral Morrison realized that humanity was fighting more than just a war for survival. They were challenging the fundamental assumptions that held galactic civilization together. Every human victory sent a message to conquered species across the galaxy that the chain could be broken and freedom was possible. The psychological impact began to spread as word of human resistance reached other parts of the galaxy through subspace communications. Species that had accepted their servitude for generations began to remember what independence felt like. Some even started asking their Zephyrian overseers uncomfortable questions about why the hierarchy was necessary. Dr. Alex Morgan documented how humanity's impact went beyond military victories. Human broadcasts of music and art and literature showed conquered species what civilization looked like when it was free to develop naturally. These cultural artifacts were more dangerous to the hierarchy than any weapon because they inspired hope in places where hope had been forgotten. The Battle of Proxima Station marked the turning point of the entire conflict. Zephyrian forces had surrounded the human outpost with overwhelming numbers and demanded surrender within 6 hours. Instead of complying, the station commander broadcast a message that was heard across half the galaxy. Commander Tony Mitchell told the aliens that humanity would never surrender no matter how hopeless the situation appeared. He explained that humans had faced extinction many times in their history and had always found a way to survive. Death was preferable to slavery, and his people would fight until their last breath rather than accept a place in the Dominion chain. The 6-hour battle that followed became legendary among both human and alien forces. The station was destroyed, but not before its defenders had eliminated an entire Zephyrian fleet. More importantly, the battle was broadcast live to conquered species throughout the galaxy, who watched in amazement as primitives fought trained soldiers to a standstill. Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Torres received reports that resistance movements had begun forming on worlds that had been peaceful for centuries. The example of human defiance was spreading like a virus through the galactic hierarchy. Species that had never dreamed of rebellion were suddenly questioning why they accepted alien rule. The situation became critical when 3 conquered species formally declared their independence from Zephyrian control. These were not primitive worlds, but established civilizations that had been part of the hierarchy for over 1,000 years. Their rebellion sent shockwaves through the entire collective command structure. Chief Scientist Paul Wright's latest innovation was perhaps the most terrifying thing the aliens had ever encountered. His adaptive AI systems could learn from alien tactics during combat and develop countermeasures in real time. Zephyrian commanders found themselves fighting an enemy that became more dangerous with every engagement. The AI breakthrough came when Paul realized that galactic military doctrine had become predictable through thousands of years of standardization. Human artificial intelligence could identify patterns in alien behavior and exploit weaknesses that the aliens themselves did not know existed. The machines were learning to think like humans, rather than like the logical systems that dominated galactic technology. Captain Amy Walsh discovered that panic was spreading through Zephyrian society as reports of human capabilities reached their home worlds. The aliens had built their entire civilization on the assumption that the hierarchy was natural and unbreakable. The existence of a species that rejected this assumption threatened everything they believed about the universe. Admiral Morrison found himself in command of a growing fleet as captured alien ships were converted to human use. His forces had learned to fight in ways that made no sense according to galactic military theory, but worked perfectly against enemies who followed predictable tactics. The humans were winning through pure, stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The war had become something that neither side had expected when it began. For the Zephyrians, it was no longer a simple conquest, but a fight for the survival of their entire way of life. For humanity, it was proof that freedom was worth any sacrifice, and that even the most powerful enemies could be defeated by people who refused to give up hope. Hegemony Lord Zarthun arrived in the solar system with the largest armada ever assembled in galactic history. His massive flagship dwarfed entire human fleets and carried weapons that could destroy planets with a single shot. He had come personally to crush the human rebellion before it could spread any further through the Dominion chain. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberation and watched the enemy fleet emerge from hyperspace. The numbers were impossible to comprehend, with over 5,000 warships arranged in perfect formation. His own fleet numbered barely 300 vessels, and most of those were converted civilian ships with improvised weapons. Zarthun had ruled his sector of the galaxy for over 2,000 years and had never faced a serious challenge to his authority. The very idea that primitives could threaten the established order filled him with rage that burned through his ancient mind. These humans would be made an example that would discourage rebellion for another millennium. The first phase of the battle began when Zarthun demanded immediate surrender from all human forces. His message was broadcast across every human settlement and ship with the promise of quick death for those who submitted peacefully. Continued resistance would result in the complete extermination of the human species, followed by the sterilization of their home world. Admiral Morrison's response was heard throughout the galaxy as it was relayed by countless alien communication networks. He told Zarthun that humanity had not come this far just to surrender when faced with their greatest challenge. The human fleet would fight with everything they had and show the galaxy what freedom truly meant. Commander Tony Mitchell led the first wave of human ships against the alien armada in what should have been a suicide mission. His fighters were outnumbered 50-1, but they used new tactics that Paul Wright's AI systems had developed specifically for this battle. The humans struck fast and hard before disappearing into the asteroid field surrounding the outer planets. The psychological warfare began immediately as Amy Walsh's communications team broadcast human music and literature across all alien frequencies. Conquered species throughout the galaxy watched as humans faced impossible odds with songs of defiance echoing through space. The cultural attack was more devastating than any weapon because it reminded enslaved peoples what they had lost. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez had spent months preparing humanity's ultimate weapon, which was not a device, but an idea that could destroy the foundations of galactic hierarchy. Her research had proven that the technological stagnation of the Dominion chain was not strength but fatal weakness. Species that stopped growing intellectually could not adapt to truly creative opposition. The revelation came when Lisa demonstrated that alien technology had not advanced significantly in over 1,000 years. The hierarchy discouraged innovation because new ideas threatened established power structures. The hegemony lords maintained control by ensuring that their subjects never developed capabilities that could challenge their supremacy. Human technology was centuries behind galactic standards, but it was growing and changing with every battle. Lisa's teams created new weapons and defenses faster than alien strategists could analyze them. The humans were evolving their capabilities in real time, while their enemies remained trapped by ancient doctrines and rigid thinking. Zarthun watched, in growing alarm as his massive fleet struggled against the human defenders. His ships were individually superior, but the humans fought with coordination and creativity that his forces could not match. Worse yet, his own allies were beginning to question why they were fighting to preserve a system that clearly had fundamental weaknesses. The turning point came when three entire species switched sides during the height of the battle. These were not recently conquered primitives, but established members of the hierarchy who had served the hegemony lords for millennia. They had watched human resistance with growing admiration and finally decided that freedom was worth the risk of destruction. Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Torres led boarding parties that captured key Zephyrian vessels during the confusion of the defections. Her forces used the aliens' own ships against them while broadcasting messages of liberation to anyone who would listen. The hierarchy that had seemed unbreakable just months before was now collapsing from within. The space around Earth became a nightmare of shifting alliances as more species joined the human cause. Zarthun found himself fighting not just primitives, but veteran forces who knew all his tactics and weaknesses. The rebellion he had come to crush was now a galactic revolution that threatened everything he had spent millennia building. Chief, scientist Paul Wright unleashed his most dangerous creation as human AI systems began teaching liberated species how to innovate and think creatively. The artificial intelligences spread through captured alien networks like a virus carrying the concept of independent thought to worlds that had forgotten such things were possible. Captain Amy Walsh discovered that panic was spreading through the highest levels of galactic government as reports reached the hegemony lords on their distant throne worlds. Several sectors had declared independence, while others were experiencing massive civil unrest. The war that had started as a simple conquest had become a threat to their entire civilization. Admiral Morrison realized that humanity had accomplished something impossible according to every expert in the galaxy. They had broken the Dominion chain, not through superior firepower, but through the simple refusal to accept that some beings were meant to rule while others served. The idea of universal freedom was spreading faster than any army could march. The final assault came when Zarthun himself led his personal guard in a desperate attempt to destroy the human flagship. His ancient ship carried weapons that had ended civilizations, but Morrison's crew was ready for him. The battle between the two commanders became a symbol for the entire conflict, as old tyranny fought new freedom among the stars. Dr. Alex Morgan documented the moment when the unthinkable happened and Zarthun's mighty armada began to retreat. The hegemony lord, who had never known defeat, was forced to withdraw from a battle against primitives who should have been crushed in the first hour. The psychological impact of this retreat echoed across the galaxy like a thunderclap. The Battle of Sol ended with humanity victorious, but Admiral Morrison knew the war was far from over. Other hegemony lords would come with even larger fleets and more desperate tactics. But something fundamental had changed in the galaxy, and there was no going back to the old order. Species that had been slaves for millennia were remembering what it meant to be free. The Dominion chain that had controlled galactic civilization for thousands of years was breaking apart as worlds declared independence and demanded the right to determine their own destinies. Humanity had lit a fire that would burn across the stars until every being in the galaxy could choose their own path through life. The victory celebration was brief because everyone knew this was just the beginning. The real work of building a free galaxy would take generations, and there would be many more battles before the old hierarchy was completely destroyed. But for the first time in recorded history, conquered peoples had hope that change was possible and freedom was within their reach. The defeat of hegemony. Lord Zarthun sent shockwaves across the galaxy that changed everything about how civilizations interacted with each other. Admiral Morrison found himself reluctantly thrust into galactic politics as liberated species looked to humanity for guidance on how to build free societies. The humans surprised everyone again by refusing to become the new rulers of the galaxy. President Ellen Davis addressed the newly formed Galactic Freedom Alliance from the steps of the rebuilt United Nations building on Earth. Representatives from over 40 species had gathered to discuss how they would govern themselves without the rigid hierarchy that had controlled their lives for millennia. Her words were broadcast to billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. Ellen explained that humanity had not fought for the right to rule others, but for the right of everyone to rule themselves. The humans would share their knowledge and offer assistance, but they would not impose their will on species that had just won their independence. True freedom meant that each world could choose its own path, without interference from distant overlords. Captain Jake Morrison, where it all began, now explored a galaxy transformed by the war that nobody had wanted. The rigid hierarchy was being replaced by voluntary cooperation between free species who traded ideas and resources as equals. Former slaves had become partners in exploration and research, while ancient enemies worked together on projects that would have been impossible under the old system. The changes went far beyond politics and military matters, as Dr. Alex Morgan documented in his reports to the Alliance Council. The galaxy was experiencing its first period of genuine innovation in thousands of years, as species began thinking creatively without fear of punishment from their superiors. New technologies and artistic movements were emerging everywhere as civilizations rediscovered their potential. The former Zephyrian territories had become testing grounds for new forms of government as species experimented with democracy and federation and other concepts that had been forbidden under the Dominion chain. Some attempts failed, but others succeeded brilliantly and provided examples that inspired further changes across the galaxy. Commander Tony Mitchell established the Freedom Academy on a former Hegemony Lord stronghold where beings from different species could learn about self-governance and individual rights. The curriculum included human history and philosophy, but also drew from the experiences of other species who had maintained some memory of independence during their years of slavery. The Academy became a symbol of the new galaxy, as students who had been enemies just years before now worked together on solving problems that affected everyone. Wars between species became rare, as former adversaries discovered they had more in common than their old rulers had wanted them to believe. Chief Scientist Paul Wright led research teams that combined the knowledge of dozens of species in ways that had never been attempted before. His AI systems helped translate not just languages, but entire ways of thinking as civilizations shared their unique perspectives on science and technology. The results exceeded every prediction about what cooperative research could achieve. The breakthrough discoveries came rapidly as species pooled their knowledge instead of hoarding it for military advantage. Medical treatments that had taken centuries to develop under the old system were now created in months through collaborative effort. Energy production and space travel and countless other fields advanced at unprecedented rates. Captain Amy Walsh commanded exploration fleets that ventured into previously forbidden sectors of the galaxy, where the Hegemony Lords had conducted secret experiments for millennia. What they found there provided even more evidence that the old hierarchy had been built on lies and fear rather than any natural order of dominance. Ancient ruins showed that the galaxy had once been home to many free civilizations that had traded and cooperated peacefully for thousands of years. The Hegemony Lords had destroyed most records of this era because it proved that their system of control was not inevitable or necessary. Species could live together without masters and slaves. Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Torres established veteran support networks for former resistance fighters who struggled to adapt to peacetime after years of guerrilla warfare. Many had difficulty accepting that the war was truly over and that they no longer needed to fight for survival every day. The psychological scars of the conflict ran deep in both human and alien populations, but healing was possible through programs that brought former enemies together to work on reconstruction projects. Veterans from both sides discovered that they had more in common with each other than with civilians who had never experienced combat. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez founded the Galactic Technology Exchange, where species could share innovations freely without fear that their discoveries would be used against them. The organization became one of the most successful institutions of the new era as civilizations learned to trust each other through cooperative research projects. Her work proved that technological progress accelerated dramatically when species competed through innovation rather than warfare. The galaxy began developing solutions to problems that had plagued civilizations for millennia, including resource scarcity and environmental degradation and social inequality. Admiral Morrison received regular reports from his daughter Lucy Carter, who commanded the new generation of exploration vessels that were discovering wonders throughout the galaxy. These were not military ships, but scientific expeditions that included members from many species working together to expand the boundaries of knowledge. Lucy's reports described planets where former slave species were rebuilding their civilizations according to their own values and traditions. Artistic renaissance and cultural revival were happening everywhere as peoples rediscovered heritage that the hegemony lords had tried to erase. The galaxy was becoming more diverse and beautiful with every passing year. The most moving reports came from worlds where children from different species played together without the fear and hatred that had divided their parents. These young beings grew up seeing cooperation as natural, while conflict seemed strange and unnecessary. They represented the future that humanity had fought to create. President Davis often reflected on how much had changed since that first encounter. Between Jake Morrison's crew and the Zephyrian scout ship, humanity had gone from unknown primitives to reluctant liberators of an entire galaxy in just a few years. The transformation seemed impossible, but it had happened through simple refusal to accept that freedom was not for everyone. The final scene of the Great Transformation took place on New Harmony Station, where representatives from over 200 species gathered to sign the Galactic Freedom Charter. The document established principles of cooperation and mutual respect that would guide interspecies relations for generations to come. As Ellen Davis signed the charter on behalf of humanity, she thought about all the people who had died to make this moment possible. Their sacrifice had not been in vain, because they had proved that any species, no matter how small or seemingly weak, possessed an unbreakable spirit that could change the universe. The galaxy had learned to dream again, and those dreams were being turned into reality by beings who had discovered that they were stronger together than any tyranny could ever be. Freedom had triumphed not through conquest, but through the simple demonstration that another way of living was possible. Humanity's greatest victory was not defeating their enemies, but teaching the galaxy that cooperation was stronger than domination, and that hope was more powerful than fear. The unbreakable spirit that had carried humans from caves to stars now belonged to every being who chose freedom over slavery and love over hatred.